I will be your MC for today's event. Raising the attainment of all learners is not just seen as a policy initiative, but it is also an ethical imperative. The raison d'être of the symposium stems from the persistent decline in examination results over the years in languages and mathematics, which continue to point toward a downward trend. This trend has been linked to several factors. In an attempt to address these, it is clear that a collective engagement from all stakeholders and partners in education is necessitated. This involves school leaders, researchers, teachers, parents, and learners, as well as national policymakers. This symposium brings together innovative ideas and proven practice, all focusing on how to translate pupil aspiration into tangible progress for individual learners. The aim is to bring together all stakeholders for an exchange and sharing of experiences on all aspects relating to learner attainment. The symposium is expected to offer an all-inclusive session of professional learning opportunity for reflection and inspiration. It will equally offer practical strategies that can be implemented in schools going forward so that schools can feel empowered to better raise attainment for all of their learners. It also brings together educators and others interested in education. The program kicked off with a soft 2-day training session where our keynote speaker for today, Dr. Goran Lezandich, capacitated middle learners on assessment strategies and how assessment data can be used to raise attainment. Today's program will involve speakers from all aspects of education and is expected to provide an exceptional value for learners, academics, and industry researchers. The stimulating presentations by schools are guaranteed to inspire, connect, and help shape the future of education on a national level. Following the presentations, there will also be opportunities for questions, discussions, and comments. Before I proceed any further, let me welcome the Minister for Education, Dr. Justin Valentin, to the podium to offer his opening remarks and officially launch the symposium under the theme, Working Together to Raise Attainment for All Learners. Minister?
Thank you, Ms. Elaine. Minister Marie-Céline Zialor, Minister for Youth, Sport and Family, members of the National Assembly, Honorable Rocky Irani, PSs of the Ministry of Education, Dr. Goran, our keynote speaker this morning, colleagues of the executive team of the Ministry of Education, head teachers, students, colleagues in education, good morning. Let me begin this opening remark by extending our warmest Seychelles greetings to Dr. Goran, who over this week has been the guest of honor at the Ministry of Education. In fact, Dr. Goran was unanimously selected by the organizing team as the person whom we should be inviting for the workshop and symposium. His previous involvement with the Ministry of Education through the UNESCO IB programs have been impactful. I understand He has been coming over to Seychelles a couple of times before, and he is certainly not an unfamiliar face to our local education community. When the proposal was put to me, I supported and endorsed the choice. I noted from his CV that he was connected and affiliated to ACER, the Australian Council for Education Research. When I was growing up as a semi-specialist in the assessment, testing, and measurement field, I would always refer to ACER as a source for literature or significant development in the assessment field. I am aware of some big names in the field of assessment who have worked for ACER. I had referenced the work of people like Jeff Masters, who at one point was the CEO of ACER. I had referenced the work of Gila Leader, published under the auspices of ACER. So to decide on flying an affiliate of ACER over to crown our symposium and workshop was probably the fastest decision I have made so far in my portfolio. I may be exaggerating, but the message is simple. We are confident that Dr. Goran has accumulated sufficient experiences in this domain to share with us. So, Dr. Goran, thank you for accepting to come over while I take this opportunity to ask all the participants to make the most of these few days. Dear colleagues, ever since I have started this journey as Minister for Education, I have been consistent in my narratives about assessment. Our education system needs attainment leaders who should be in a position to evoke excellence in the teachers under their care and who should ultimately use assessment results to improve learning. My personal drive to quality assessment dated back 1994 when I was reading my Bachelor of Education at Edith Cowan University. There was that compulsory module, EDU 3101, Education Measurement and Evaluation, which then all students have to do via the external mode. That module introduced to me the world of evaluation, testing, and measurement. I instantaneously developed a love and a passion for classroom assessment. I was influenced to do my first thesis in this field, assessing the content validity and internal consistency, reliability of tests constructed by teachers without testing and measurement training. My thesis was relevant then, as teachers within our education system were not necessarily given training in that specific area. My thesis brought a new discourse within the local education system. During the year 1997 to 2000, I spent most of my afternoons doing workshops in schools across the country. I can still remember at the dawn of the new millennium when, along with other colleagues, we conducted Saturday sessions on assessment and testing in regional centers across the island. We are now almost back to the future. My dear colleagues, we have gathered today to synchronize our commitment on assessment. We all have this urge to see our students achieving more successes in schools. This symposium is about the building of a new assessment regime, about the formation of new attainment leaders, about equipping teachers that can look into assessment results and formulate accurate stories and drawing the best possible conclusion about the students' learning. This symposium is about building our assessment literacy and ensuring that our teachers and leaders will ultimately use assessment results and ensure worthwhile learning outcomes. To me, this should be a powerful symposium. We have gathered here today under the theme, working together to raise attainment of all learners. This theme is not accidental. On the contrary, it explains our proactiveness in spearheading a new initiative for us to once and for all take the bull by the horn, so to speak, and find solution to our problem in a strategic and sustained manner. We should and we will offset this worrying trend in performance. We want more successes from all our students. On February 12 this year, a press conference on the students' performance in national and international examination was held with all media houses. I underscored that improving performance remained a priority element in the strategic plan and target of the Ministry of Education. And while 2021 was a year of pronouncement, 2022 will be one of actions. I also made an important undertaking. We would meet in good time to have a serious conversation on the results of assessment. Ladies and gentlemen, we have kept this rendezvous, and here we are today. Cognizant of the Ministry of Education's vision to empower our citizens to contribute positively to the process of building a sustainable, peaceful, and harmonious Seychelles society, we remain resolved as the principal advisor to the government on education matters to maintain a clear focus on the long-term health and performance of the system, ensuring that all learners strive to make achievement possible and worthwhile. We will continue to strive to create context for all parties in the system to deliver and fulfill the major intent of the government in relation to education through the establishment of links and platforms for other sectors of the community, including the private and public, to network meaningfully towards facilitating achievements of all learners in Seychelles. The strategic plan of the Ministry of Education for the period 2021-2024 outlines clearly the strategic direction of the Ministry of Education to all stakeholders in education over the next 3 years. With regards to attainment, it aims to ensure that all learners get equal opportunities to achieve educational successes while ensuring the holistic development within the system. More specifically, the plan makes provision for mechanisms to be put in place to measure learners' performance systematically, coupled with the development of a comprehensive special education needs and disability models. Ladies and gentlemen, I will not do justice to the theme of this symposium if I do not share my thoughts on attainment. Attainment is an individual's passport to personal, social, cultural, and economic opportunities. Raising attainment means improving life chances. This does not just simply focusing on exam results, but instead looking at attainment in its widest sense. It is this rich attainment which enables all our students to make good progress and develop the skills, ambition, and the know-how they need to improve life challenges and opportunities. Every part of our education system has a part to play. The early years are crucial, laying the foundation for future learning and development, moving through to schools and beyond. So to raise attainment, we need to make strong progress at each stage of learning. By ensuring that every child is progressing well at all ages, by maintaining the pace of progress, and by consistently building confidence, we can help to further improve the opportunities for our students. We have many successful learners being taught by a lot of great teachers across Seychelles. Although I do not want to preempt the discussion, I think that at this point we need to reflect deeply on the following questions. How do we increase the ambition, aspiration, and expectation of every learner? How do we deliver excellent learning and teaching in every classroom, every day? How do we develop effective leadership at all levels to improve attainment? How do we engage families and the wider community in raising attainment? How do we use information intelligently to understand progress? Having looked at the program of the symposium, I believe it promises to be interesting and thought-provoking. The sub-themes are very relevant and encompassing, and I am sure that it will provide the opportunity for participants to delve and debate on a myriad of issues relevant to attainment. This will ultimately culminate into silent recommendations which will allow us to address underperformance in our education institutions. I am pleased to note that members of the attainment team have had the opportunity to follow training on the 16th and 17th May, which was conducted by Dr. Goran. You will recall that this was one of the pronouncements I made at the beginning of this year, which is part of our endeavor to strengthen capacity in our school. Fairly cool, LIFO. Ladies and gentlemen, we are indeed making headway. I have no doubt that members of the attainment team will make optimum use of the knowledge and skills to improve the quality of analysis and results and put in place robust mechanisms at the respective schools to track every learner's progress and intervene in a timely manner when attainment appears to be dipping. Please, let us not forget that we need to hold ourselves accountable for the progress of each and every learner. In conclusion, let me propose a vote of thanks. I have already thanked Dr. Goran for being with us. I wish to commend the symposium organizing team for working tirelessly to ensure the smooth organization of this important event. I wish to thank Mr. Cyril Pilet for leading the organizing committee. I am also thankful to all the media houses for providing coverage. Most importantly, I am grateful to all the participants of this symposium and for all members of the education team who have understood my vision of quality education, and for those of you who are trying your best to make others understand this vision. On this note, I would like to wish all participants fruitful deliberation. Our education system has an old culture of assessing students. In my opinion, we test students on academic matters too early and too soon. We test to rank students. We test to classify students in streams. And I wonder about the extent to which we test to understand how students are learning and how curriculum should be revised to achieve whatever it purports to measure. If there is a reform which I hope to carry out in assessment field in the Seychelles, it will certainly be a reform to develop a new assessment regime for our students. I hope that you should be able to reflect on this point in our plenary sessions over the 2 days. Now, I have the pleasure to officially launch the Education Symposium under the theme, Working Together to Raise Attainment of All Learners. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Minister. Today's workshop is two-pronged in that it will feature 5 presentations from speakers from different educational institutions and backgrounds, and it will also provide attendees with an opportunity to ask questions and make comments. All presentations and discussions will be led by our moderator, Ms. Thyra Four. Ms. Four is the Principal Education Officer in the Curriculum Coordination and Support section within the Ministry of Education. Ladies and gentlemen, it now gives me great pleasure to invite our guest and keynote speaker, Dr. Goran Lezandich. Dr. Lezandich will be speaking about how to measure and improve learners' attainment. Before Dr. Lezandich assumes the podium, allow me to read his short bio. Dr. Goran Lezandich is Research Director, System-Wide Testing and Manager in the Sydney office at the Australian Council for Educational Research. Before joining ACER in 2019, Dr. Goran was Senior Manager, Research and Development with the Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority. His research experience and interests include large-scale assessments, educational measurement, multi-stage adaptive test, and the science of learning. He currently provides high-level measurement expertise and leadership for assessment programs and educational policy efforts at the national, regional, and international levels. Dr. Lezandich served as a senior assessment specialist with the UNESCO International Bureau of Education and is an honorary associate at the Center for Educational Measurement and Assessment, the University of Sydney. He holds a PhD in cognitive psychology from the University of New South Wales. Dr. Lezandich, the floor is yours.
Use the clicker. Excellent. Good morning to you all. Honorable ministers, organizing committee, dear officials and colleagues, teachers, students, and if I may say friends. This is my 4th time being here in Seychelles, in this room, and I see a lot of familiar faces. I can now handle 2 teaspoons of Seychelles chili sauce. And I hope if I get to 5, you might consider me for honorable citizen. Today, I am going to share with you some of our research, some of our experiences that is being built over the years in Australia and championed by Australian researcher, if I may humbly say. Story of improving attainment, improving growth in student achievement is actually quite easy. There are 3 steps that we need to take. We need to measure the attainment. We need to know where are our students located on their trajectory of learning. But the second step is quite a bit harder and quite more involved. As Minister for Education, Dr. Justine, just said in his research, looked at, bringing meaning to the measurement is the next hard step. Understanding what students can do, what a student's thinking process is, and how we can motivate them to become learners is that hard second step that we all have to work together. The last step is to use that insight, to use that diagnostic information as a diagnostic feedback to close the gaps. Whoops. And we're back. To use that diagnostic feedback to close the gaps in the learning that we observed, and to lift the students' performance even further up. I think we just lost the connection. Just be with us for a while. Okay, right. The most important thing is to understand that every learner has potential and capacity to grow in their learning. And what our job is to understand what is a starting point, how far in trajectory of learning we can push every student, and what is the support that we need to give to the students, to the teachers, to the schools, and to the parents. And what I'm going to suggest is that the key tool in these efforts is a formative classroom assessment. We all know that we heard the word formative assessments. We all heard the word classroom assessment, and we make the connection between the two, and we often confuse them to be the same. It is true that formative assessments are mostly classroom assessment, but it's not true that every classroom assessment is a formative assessment. So let's have a look at what the formative assessments are. This is the latest definition of formative assessments, and I will read it to you word by word. Formative assessments is a planned, ongoing process used by all students and teachers during learning and teaching to elicit and use the evidence of students' learning to improve understanding of intended discipline and support students to become self-direct learners. So the key here is that the activity has to be planned. It has to be ongoing. It's a process that involves students, teachers. And it has to result in growth in students' achievement, but also it has to help students become learners and take the learning in their own hands. How do we do that? Well, we need to have a clear understanding of what the goals of learnings are and what are the goals of the formative assessment. We need to elicit and conduct the analysis not just of students' scores, but of students' thinking, cognitive process, and thoughts. We need to provide actionable feedback to the teachers. And that actionable feedback means timely and effective feedback that will create the growth in learning. We need to engage students in assessments, in peer learning, and we need to provide feedback to adjust the learning strategies, to review our curriculum materials, to evaluate our teaching and learning preparation. Underpinning formative assessment, all the research is telling us that to link the assessment, action, and improvement, the three need to be underpinned by same theory of learning. This is shown in research by Heritage and his colleagues, that they show the teachers are really well in understanding how the students are progressing. But they're struggling to see what's the next step for each student relatively to their progression level. Teachers know what is in their program of study, what is in the curriculum, but they can't always link that with the speed by some students are growing, with the gaps that they need to fill for other students. So to overcome that apparent contradiction, what we really need is understanding of how typical students grow alongside the learning trajectory. And the way to formalize that is to establish, evaluate, and then implement learning progressions. And the research that was done by Mark Wilson since the late 90s, and some research that's being done by some of the people that the Honorable Minister mentioned, suggests that learning progressions, formal learning progressions, are that binding element of the classroom formative assessment. What are the learning progressions? Learning progressions are a description of knowledge, skills, and understanding that students typically develop as it progresses through a school. Learning progressions are not replacement for the curriculum. Learning progressions are supporting the curriculum because they are providing information about typical trajectory of growth for students. But they do have two elements. One is quantitative and the other one is qualitative. The quantitative element of learning progressions is the numerical scale. Is the scale that is based on empirical evidence what students can and can't do. Items and tasks are then calibrated along the same scale that is used to report a student's performance. So we have both items and students on the same measurement scale. And items and tasks need to differentiate between different skills and knowledges and understanding that are laid out in the curriculum documents and that we expect students to develop as a part of their learning. Qualitative element is integral part of the learning progressions. If we just have the measurements, we don't have insights in students' thinking and in students' performance. It is the qualitative measurements that tell us what each of the region of the scale means in terms of these knowledge, skills, and understanding. And we typically structure those regions and report them as a proficiency levels or the learning progression levels. Professor Mark Wilson likes to depict learning progression as thought bubbles. Because we can all agree, even if you don't support the notion of formal learning progressions, that when students enter the school, it has less knowledge, and as it progresses through school, accumulates more knowledge, accumulates more complex knowledge. So we would all agree that students' trajectory of learning is progressing from the first grade to the last. But what makes the learning progression different is that we do have empirical data of what students can and can't do at every stage of their learning. And we can translate that empirical data into the scales. And for each of these scales, we can establish levels. And for each of these levels, we can then describe the learning that we all agree exists here on the left. So that is the difference between formal learning progressions and just common understanding of learning trajectory. Now, that doesn't mean that all of the learning progressions have to be simple or linear. Here's an example of learning progressions that are developed to support Australian national curriculum, and this is only 2 years ago that these learning progressions are developed. Now, this is learning progressions for numeracy, and I don't want to show you the details, but what I want to point you out that slice of pie there in the sort of 2 o'clock position that says proportional thinking, you see how that slice of learning progression is smaller than the rest of the learning progressions for other elements? You see how it starts later? This is an example that one can develop learning progression for complex subjects that are taught in a cyclical manner, that are not taught simply, from one lesson to another lesson. So I hope that this is just a small example to show you that learning progressions are not trying to streamline everything into a single simplistic representation. They can be as complex as this discipline that you are trying to teach. What learning progressions do in terms of the reporting of student attainment and achievement, they're enabling us to focus on growth in students' performance. This is an actual example of a school from Australia, and these are the results of students on the numeracy test. The first point is the results for students in the numeracy test when they are in year 3. The second point is students' results from last year when the same students were in year 5. And you can see here 2 lines of a different color. The top line, the blue line, is the line for that school. It shows how much growth students had in that school in between 2 years. When you look at the performance of all other students with the same starting point, you can see that this school has grown its students significantly more. Students from that school ended up in band 7 of NAPLAN, which is its own learning progression. Whereas the rest of the students are sitting in the middle of the band 6. So the important information here is that focusing on how fast students are learning, we are actually able to lift the performance, and we are able to interpret the performance when we see the differences between growth achieved in 2 schools. Support and professional development for teachers and schools is key elements of successful implementation of classroom formative assessments. Schools need to be equipped with necessary resources. They have to have teachers, they have to have skills and knowledge, and formative assessment has to be integrated in other teaching and assessment activities. Classroom formative assessments have to be developed in a sustained and strategic effort. Effective formative assessment are dependent on the solid knowledge of the content that is being taught and learning progression through as they're providing further elaboration of the curriculum content are essential part of those skills that we need to equip our teachers with. Where does the support for teachers links directly to the learning progressions though? Here is the example of the learning progressions that ACR has developed over the last 20 years. And you will see that it has 4 layers. The first 2 layers are typical for the learning progression. It has discipline understanding, it has levels, it has level descriptors. What is different, though, is that the last layer contains supplementary materials, instructional activities, examples of tasks, examples of students' performance that are directly linked to the strand-based level descriptors and then to the level progressions. So, when you know where the student is in a ACR learning progression, you know that the next level that needs to push that students, we can just look at the materials and pull the instructional materials and have ready-made action plan for the next step. Ready-made plan of feedback and actions for the student. So, to go back to the first slide that I started with, how do I see that attainment can be improved? We need to have formative assessments that provide valid and reliable results. Formative assessments should provide actionable advice that is immediately available to the teachers. They must be part of a well-integrated assessment system. They have to link to the termly exams. They have to link to the key stage tests. Students have to know what's the expectation of classroom formative assessments and what are the expectation of other forms of assessment. And the assessments need to provide a clear indication of what type of professional development and what type of professional support we need to provide to our schools and teachers. So, reflecting on the current state of affairs in Seychelles, competency-based assessment framework is in development. And it has been in development for some years. Some pilot studies have been done. Some of the learning progression levels that underpin the new assessments have been prepared. And the new curriculum and the new assessment framework will provide a strong basis for development of the learning progressions of the types that I was just talking you about. Now, to finish, let me try to paint you a story. It's Friday. A P2 teacher in Grand Anse Praline Primary School realizes that some of the students might be struggling with the reading comprehension. She decided that a quick test, 5 items per each level, could help understand where the students are. She promptly logs into an item bank that Education Ministry maintains and curates and pulls the item for the test. On Monday morning, she gathered the items, prints the test, and gives tests to the students. While students are doing the test, she prepares the marking answer sheet for the students. After the tea break, students come back, and then they mark each other's work, distributed across the classroom. While students are doing that, teachers is preparing for the next step, entering the marks into the system that is very simple and is provided by the ministry. It's simple as items, students, zeros for incorrect responses, ones for correct responses. Teacher enters that report and immediately gets a class report that tells teacher that 80% of students are operating at level 1, another 80% of students are operating at level 2, and that around 50% of her class have reached items at level 3. Teacher did not expect that some students can't do items in level 1. So she focuses on the students who scored 57 points or less on a test and realizes that none of those students can do items in level 3. They can barely do items at level 2, and they're struggling with one particular item at level 1. Immediately, because the item classification sheet has links between item, level descriptor, and program of study code, teacher can pull in what space, what place of program of study the skill that is assessed in the item 5 were taught. Immediately, because they know that program of study, they know what immediate action needs to be taken to address this particular gap. And the teacher can then go through other items and makes the similar connection. And by the end of the day, teacher have action plan for 3 steps to do with the students that might be lagging behind her expectation. So, in conclusion, I think that I provide you enough thought to convince you that learning progression, supporting the classroom formative assessment, integrated with termly exam, integrated with key stage tests, are essential ingredients for lifting performance of your students. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lezandich. We will now open the floor for any questions and comments, so I will leave you in the good hands of Ms. Tyra, who will take over as moderator.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Dr. Lezandich, for this insightful keynote address, and which sets the tone for the National Symposium. We'd like to invite you to kindly take a seat at our head table for the questions, comments, and clarifications that will come. Dear audience, we have about 30 minutes to provide questions, to ask for clarifications to Dr. Lezandich. As you may see, in the middle we have sets of microphones that have been put up, and this is for you to be able to ask your questions or clarifications to him. So when you do so, please kindly introduce yourself and your schools, and then you may proceed. If there's anybody in the house inside today that has questions and would like to kickstart the session, please just raise your hand and I will give you the opportunity to start the sessions. Yes, Ms. Magda.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry? I think so. First of all, Professor, let me thank you for your presentation. I just have 2 questions. The first one, listening to your presentation, you have focused a lot on formative assessment. If you can give us your personal opinion on summative assessment, please, briefly. And then secondly, currently in our educational system, we have a competency-based approach from, let's say, primary 3 to primary 6. Perhaps if you can advise us, if you relate it to our assessment structure, what are some improvements perhaps we have to make so to better align the way of assessing our pupils with the CBA that we have in place? Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me at the back? Good. So I do believe that summative assessments have a significant role in educational system to play. We all need to be accountable to parents, to students, and to wider community. And I do think that summative assessments, they are the only assessments that can provide that accountability role. I do, however, think that we need to change the way how we are developing our summative assessments. I think that we need to integrate summative assessments more into our learning and teaching strategies from the point of not just reaching the standards or the end goal, but from the point of signaling to the students their learning potential. So at the end, when I was talking about integrated system of assessments, there is no reason why some of the learning progression underpinning that we are proposing for classroom assessments can't be applied for the summative assessments as well. So I hope in that way, summative assessments are not just something the students practice for. They are simply another form of assessment. Students know that they are assessed on the same learning trajectory. There is no need for teaching to the test if what we are assessing in the summative assessments is part of our everyday teaching, learning, and continuous assessment. So that is my strong view on the summative assessment. And to your question about competency-based assessment, I think that competency-based assessment is the modern development. The Seychelles are there in lockstep with other countries. The competency-based assessment actually lends itself to developing an assessment system much more than traditional assessments because it provides clear path to create a whole set of assessments that are criterion referenced. And the criterion reference tests, those criterions are in the competency-based assessment, are in competency-based curriculum. So what we need to do is translate them into our assessment frameworks. And this is where I see that learning progressions can play the biggest role, because the curriculum by its nature is cyclical. We return to the same content over and over again. It's not developmental, to lack of other words. Whereas learning progressions can help us order those competencies based on what students do. So we have a realistic ordering of the learning trajectory for all of our students. And then that can be applied to formative assessments, to termly exams, and to the key stage testing.
Thank you, Dr. Lezandich. Ms. Walls, does it answer your questions? Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, Minister Diallo.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Dr. Goran. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. I might not have a question, maybe a comment that you might want to respond to. First of all, to everybody in the room, the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Family supports this initiative, so you have all of our support. That's why I'm here. Second of all, in any initiatives that is new, we have got to make sure we include the parents because they are so used to their kids being evaluated, being tested in a particular way, and there might be some resistance as well. So this is my comment, and then maybe into how do we get to this point, and maybe your experience in other countries that you've worked, and you've been here in Seychelles, so you know the culture quite a bit. How do we get the next step once Ministry of Education has agreed on the way forward? We get the wider community to buy in ownership. Education is everybody's business, and not just for the Ministry of Education, which has been the case for years. So breaking this mentality. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Minister. I think that is an excellent question. Without involving parents in education, we will not get the outcomes that we will see. Some of the experiences that we have in Australia has shown that significant element of such a reform is the formal outreach to parents in a form of school reports. So when students are taking the national assessment test in Australia, NAPLAN, after results are analyzed, each parent gets a report on how students perform in the test. The report actually focuses on these NAPLAN performance levels because they have descriptors that parents should understand. Parents might not be able to understand, and you don't expect parents to understand a curriculum document. But they understand a descriptor of a level. They understand the difference of the level 2 and in level 3. And that's how we communicate to the parents in terms of providing the report of how students are performing. What that does takes away of focus on grades. So when the NAPLAN report goes to the parents, it doesn't contain any grades. But it does contain information at which level students are at the moment, and it contains the understanding of knowledge and what's a student expected to do next. So we heard back from the teachers that parents are now coming to schools and saying, my student, my child is at level 2. When are you going to be doing them when are you going to be doing them, long division, or when are you going to be teaching them fractions? So that changes the discussion from, I want my kid to get grade B to what are you teaching and how can I support you in teaching? And I can tell you that student report is one of the reasons why national assessment program in Australia is still ongoing.
Thank you, Dr. Lezandich, Minister. Yes, so I have been informed that Minister Valentin, Minister Zialo, and our two PSs will unfortunately have to... Only one. Okay, will unfortunately be leaving us. So we just want to say thank you for making time this morning to be with us and for the contributions that may come even after the symposium is over. And we look forward to the collaborations and recommendations and implementations of whatever comes out from these sessions. So thank you, Minister Valentin, Minister Zialo, and PS Lespiros. So we continue. Yes, Ms. Heidi.
Good morning. I wanted to ask if in Australia all students are being assessed using the same paper in each level in the national assessment.
No. No, so basically for each year level there is a different set of papers.
Yes, I mean in the same level if they are using the same paper despite the academic level.
For the national test we have implemented a multi-stage adaptive test since 2018. So this is a computer-based test, so that consists of 3 parts. The first part of the test is the same for all of the students, and then depending on the performance of students in that first part, they are routed to a slightly more demanding set of items or to a less demanding set of items. And then after the second part, the scores from the first and the second testlet, as we call them, and that is a technical term, their results are used to send them then to the last set of testlets, to the sort of most demanding, to the sort of standard, the middle sort of part, and then obviously to the lowest lowest demanding set of items.
So it depends on the academic level of each student?
Yes, so that's actually done on the fly as the students are responding to the test.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Heidi. Thank you, Dr. Lezandich. Anybody else? Yes, Mr. Acedo.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm Goran Lezandich, Chief Education Officer for TVET and Entrepreneurship. In fact, I'm very fond with regards to
Mr.
sorry for that. Yes, Doctor, my question is about the concept of differentiated learning and mixability. Just a follow-up to Ms. Heidi's question. So what is your take with regards to the assessment method? If, for example, we are to move towards differentiated learning and mixability, and I've been in Australia as well, if you could comment a little bit on the assessment of TVET. I know it is a little bit kind of contentious in Australia. What's your view on those 3 areas? Thank you.
The sort of the learning progressions of the type that I presented are going to help with us with the differentiated learning as well, because they will where are you going to differentiate your students based on what information? So learning progressions are, in my opinion, the best way to do so, because it will tell you whether students are in level 2 or whether students are operating in level 6. And that's, I think, where should differentiated learning be happening. So that's in terms of the support. What type of assessments you can develop to support those assessments is obviously, ideally we will have some form of computer adaptive test. Multi-stage adaptive test is sort of what I would refer to ideal situation for that thing. There has been attempts, and I know that there are people in especially Northern Territory of Australia, people have used the multi-entry tests. So basically this is a test where it has 100 items printed, and teachers sort of decides where the students should start the test. I think the better option is to have a small paper test that with immediate sort of 4 or 5 questions, and then based on the response of these 4 or 5 questions, if the students get the questions right, and students can mark themselves there. You can have 4 questions on 1 page, responses on the second page. Students can mark themselves if they have 3 and more, start on page 25. If you have 2 or more, start on page 14. So you can run those in a sort of a printed low-tech form. As for the differentiated learning reforms and assessment, that's really not my area of expertise, so I wouldn't like to speculate on that.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Anybody else? Yes. Any more questions, clarifications, comments that you would want to address? Miss? Yes, Miss Laura?
Good morning, and nice to see you again.
Good morning.
Okay, good morning to you all. I was in the training for the past 2 days, but I believe, thank you, Doctor, for your presentation first, but I believe it is, I'm scared. I believe it is something that, as a group of educators, we need to really get the grasp of the new modes, because we're talking about the learning progression and what do we know, what do we have in regards to learning progression here. Ms. talked about CBA, yes. We've embarked on this approach since 2017, and to embark on learning progression, definitely it will be something good. But right now, as Deputy of Studies, what do we have at hand to work with? Because we will be imparting this to our teachers, to the people in our school, but we don't have anything at hand. I know I got the explanation yesterday, but I believe it will be good that everyone here, they do learn about it as well. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I just want to stress that at this point, this is my proposal how to move classroom assessments in Seychelles. You will have to make that decision for yourself. Is that a path that you would like to pursue? And if you make that decision, then that decision will have to be supported by resources. It will have to be supported by professional training and professional development. My comment and to your reference that the new curriculum has started in 2017 is that in terms of the timeline for the curriculum implementation and then reform of the assessment system, I think that we are having this symposium about the right time where we should be having it, because every time a new curriculum goes into the schools, it has to become, starts its own life. It has to go off the pages. It has to go into program of studies. It has to go into the teaching. It has to go into the learning. So I think that it wouldn't be opportune to do both at the same time. I think the curriculum needs the time to sort of ripen a bit, to use the word. And then when that happens, that's the point where you would introduce reforms to your assessment systems that are reflecting the state of the curriculum that you have at that point. So I think that those reforms have to be strategic, but they have to be done in consultation with schools, with teachers, and that everyone should agree on the pace of change. So I think that's the process that needs to start, and you need to be part of that process.
Thank you, Doctor. Yes, Mrs. Lagoinad.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. And like everybody else, I would like to thank you, Doctor, for your absolutely brilliant presentation. In support of what you have said and in reply to the question that was asked earlier, SITE has the mandate to train teachers, and as the new director coming in, we've been told, or I've been told, that SITE will have to be active in providing professional development sessions to schools and to the country, if you like, because we have to bring in parents as well on board. If parents are going to monitor their children's learning, they will need to know what is going on in the schools and how to interpret results that their students come home with, be that in terms of direct reporting on assignments or on the termly report, results of their summative assessments or formative assessments. So there will be training eventually. It will not happen immediately, but there is the plan for that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I do believe that the earlier that we can get teachers into this process, even teachers in a training, And I think that one of the strengths of Seychelles assessment system is that teachers are absolutely involved in all of the aspects of the assessments. And you don't see that anywhere else. It's very rare, actually, to find such a cohesion between teaching profession and the assessments.
Yeah, and we hope to be able to close the gap eventually with the training. And the training, we had initially thought would start immediately, but the plans will have to be approved first. And subsequent to that, yes, we will engage in it. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lagonade. Anybody else? Yes, Mrs. Intep.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Doctor, for your presentation. I'm Mrs. Intep, head teacher of Il Perseverance Secondary School. I last year completed my master's degree in curriculum and instruction, and my thesis was based on looking at the perceptions and practices of classroom assessments for English language teachers. And what I concluded from my thesis was the fact that the concept of classroom assessment was not really known by teachers. They were doing a lot of summative assessments, and they thought it was classroom assessment. So I thank you for bringing back this concept. But when I look at what we've been doing before, long before, we were doing a lot more formative assessments, classroom assessments, than what is happening now. And the reason I believe that we have suffered in terms of the attainment, even in English, it's because we have stopped a lot of what we used to do, which when I looked at it was a lot more formative classroom assessments than what is happening now. And I think we need to go back to those things. And your presentation is very timely, and I believe we should go along that line so that we can see a change in the attainment, even at the level of the success, the performance in English. We might look at it and we are seeing a lot of scores going high, but talk to the students, then you will know what it is, whether they are really attaining or whether they are really achieving the specific areas they should be doing, or whether it's just a mark that is high in respect to looking at it globally, but not necessarily attaining. And a lot of thought needs to be done also in regards to our record of achievement, if we have to go in the line of classroom assessments, formative assessment, and the progression that we are talking about. Because right now, the record of achievement is not really a record of achievement. It's not really showing the achievement of students. It is showing a score, and that it is labeling a student that you have not really reached a score that is required. But we really need to look at a lot of these things. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Yes, I agree with you that the problems will occur when we confuse the purposes of different assessments. And as I said, summative assessments has its own purposes, but we need to have a set of assessments that teachers can only focus on students and the feedback that they are giving to students. Not on reporting back to the head teachers, not on reporting back to the principals, and sort of taking some of that, I hope, can reduce that burden on teachers and give them a bit of a freedom to focus on their students.
Thank you. One last round to ask whether there's any more questions, clarifications before I hand you over in the good hands of Mrs. Larue. Yes, Monsieur Morel.
Good morning, everybody. Something that I picked up from the presentation. Well, I'm Mr. Morel from Pleasant Secondary, Deputy for Studies. Something that I picked up from the presentation was the ownership of students towards their learning. Maybe for the benefit of the students who are here today, and so that they also pass on the information that they have their part to do. What are some of the strategies that they will need to bring on themselves? We know that the teachers also has their part, the parents, but then the students, what are they going to do towards the ownership of their learning in that aspect? Thank you.
Absolutely agree with you that students have part to play. And I think the first step is to get them involved with the assessment process. You know, get students to mark their own work. Get students to mark each other's work. Get students to analyze the wrong answers in their own test. How are those wrong answers linked to those same learning progressions? Because if we have a good test, good formative test, and even if it's a simple multiple choice question, we can link those distractors, those long answers, to some of the knowledge that happened before, or to some of the knowledge that we expect students will have if they haven't reached the levels that we want. So involve students in the assessment process itself. Also, be transparent to the students what you expect of them for those activities. Students should know what you expect these tests to be used for. We had discussion in our training, should we, if we are running a formative classroom assessment, should we sort of make a record of it in a record book? Should we use the results in grades? I'm going to say no, because grades are, students have different relationship to grades than they have to their own learning. And I think we have to respect that. And I think if we involve students in that learning, in that process, that will help them understand what they need to do when we say learn to learn. And then the second aspect of this formative assessment that I think is useful is that students, when they receive these formative assessments in a classroom, they can actually see what's ahead of them in terms of the learning. You know, they can see that they can do 12 out of the 15 questions. And then the last 3 questions, if they're clearly linked to what's happening next in teaching and learning, is signaling students where they ought to be heading. So students might decide to flip the textbook and look, you know, and read beyond the pages that teacher gave them to read. So I think creating situation in which students' own curiosity is going to take them to further learning is the second step in that process. And then we should leave it to them. They are better and smarter than most of us.
Thank you, Dr. Lezandich. I will hand over the mic to Ms. Elaine to guide us through the rest of this morning.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thyra, and thank you very much, Dr. Goran. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a short break, about half an hour. So we will resume here at 11 a.m. We have 11, it's fine? 10:50? Okay, because we're breaking off a little early. So we'll resume here at 10:50. Now, because of health regulations, we have 2 stations. So we have one upstairs in the cafeteria, and the other one is in the MOE hall, which is right at the back of site. So if we can split ourselves up, so some can go up in the cafeteria and the others can move to the hall. We'll have some refreshments, can have some time to connect with all other participants. So thank you once again for this morning, and we'll see you in a bit.